Welcome to Heartspeak Podcast, episode 42, Meditation with the Crystal Skull. I'm kind of excited about doing this particular podcast, as working with the crystal skulls, even if we haven't got one physically in front of us, but within the ether, it's very special. And in fact, I had to ask my inner guidance to ask the crystal skulls if it was okay if we did work with them, even though we don't have them in front of us. And the answer was yes, as long as we honor and respect what they are, which is always true for anything we do. How did I come across the crystal skulls? Well, I always talk about synchronicities and how when we listen to our heart, we're looking for things that occur in threes. So here I was listening to Coast, and Caroline Ford, who is the guardian of one of the crystal skulls named Einstein, was talking on the program about how she had come across her skull in the early 1990s from a man who had been gathering items from all around the world in the 1940s. And this skull seemed to belong to her, or needing to her to be the guardian. Better way of me saying it rather than it belongs to anybody. And she kept it secret for many, many years. That's what she was advised to do, not because she was hiding it, but she worked with the skull. And then in 2010, she brought it out for everybody to see. And she's been working with the skull of consciousness since then and allowing other people to talk to it and work with it. And that certainly is my experience of these skulls. So that was my one knock. My second one was that I met up with a friend and she was talking about how I used to teach about the crystal skulls back in the mid-90s. I thought, yes, I did, didn't I? And I remembered just how excited I was to learn more and more about these skulls and to be able to share what I knew with others. So now I'm sharing with you. And then I was looking in a book, a Maya book, about something completely different, and there was a chapter on crystal skulls. Was I surprised? No, I'm not. And here I understood that it was time to talk about the skulls from my perspective, and I think that's all we can ever do, is talk from our experience, our vision, because I believe these skulls are ancient artifacts, go back a long, long way, and they all have different functions. And we will all see something different in them. And that's what I'm going to share with you in the meditation we're going to do at the end of this podcast, that what you will see in the skull will be relevant to you. But what's important before you sit there and think, I wonder what I'm going to get out of this, is to be innocent, to be empty. Let the skull come to you rather than you projecting into the skull what it is you want to get from it. So what are these skulls? They are crystal, that's the name of them. And they are usually made of a quartz, and they are often rose quartz, or they can be amethyst, or they can be clear quartz. And they are the shape of a skull. The most famous, the Mitchell Hedges skull, has actually got a detachable jaw and has the most beautiful imprints of where the teeth would go. I have sat with that skull, and as someone who has done anatomy, it is beautiful and anatomically correct. Other skulls perhaps have less perfection in them, if we're going to look at it that way, but it doesn't make them any less important. And these skulls can be small or they can be large, and they can be very heavy when they're large. And depending on the culture, you hear that different things or different numbers of skulls are available. The Native Americans talk about there being 13 skulls, and there are 12 with the one in the middle. I think that goes along very much with the Celtic idea, and certainly the idea of Arthur and his round table, the 12 and the one. The Christian idea, the 12 and the one, Jesus being the disciple that brought them together. Of course, we only talk about 12 because Judas was taken out, and so we say 12, but actually Judas was one of the disciples there. And so you may have seen the film, the Harrison Ford film, the Indiana Jones film, that talked about the skull of doom. Now, I don't want you to get too lost in that movie, but again, that was that idea of gathering these skulls together, and that when that final skull, that one, is put in the center of them, magic will happen. And the skulls are seen to carry wisdom. I think there's no doubt about that. They carry wisdom, knowledge, awareness, interdimensional awareness, awareness that is far beyond our understanding at this time. They have different correlations as to whether or not they were created in maybe the last 10,000 years, or whether they go way back to Lemuria, which we know was in its height about 100,000 years ago, or at least came into its existence. Many speak about it being an artifact that was left behind by the Atlanteans. Now, Atlantis sunk under the water of the ocean about 11,000 years ago. So there's a thought that the people, the wise people of that time, put their knowledge into the skulls, because a skull is like a computer, and you may understand that computers are full of crystals, so that the knowledge was infused into the crystal skull from the Atlantean people before the oceans took over that land. And so the knowledge of Atlantis, which I don't know if you know, is far advanced of what we have today. If we think we're advanced now technologically, we're not. But Atlantis, of course, did go underneath the waters, and therefore it did have issues. So perhaps having too much technology is not always good. For instance, we know that the Atlanteans were very much into using crystals. They knew how to harness the sun's energy into crystals to expand it, to move it, to change it. I hope you understand that that's what crystals, especially quartz crystals, have the capacity to do because of their structure. They can be programmed with information. Again, this is what computers do. But they can also transmute energy or transform it or change its frequency. And so what the Atlanteans knew how to do was to use crystals to bring the sun's energy in and to bring about change. Of course, what we think happened was they did this a little bit too much, brought in too much energy from the sun, and caused great changes within maybe our magnetic field of the Earth, or the pull of the magnetic field on the oceans, and hence the oceans came up and took the civilization or the area of Atlantis underneath the waters, and we now have that as one of our oceans. So what we understand is that in their ability to harness the sun, they also created this crystal grid that I've talked about before. And that crystal grid isn't made of crystal skulls, but these crystals are in the earth now, creating a reality for us that I call our holographic reality. In other words, crystals also have the ability to store information and ultimately create what we're called a three-dimensional hologram. So our reality, what we see in the world, is being maintained by the information stored in those crystals that creates this holographic reality. Simply said, sometime way back, someone said the sky is blue. So we all think the sky is blue. And you're convinced me, no, of course it's blue, but it's only because that's all we've ever seen. Maybe the sky is pink. And in the same way, crystal skulls are holding energy to literally help us to understand who we are, but it's also a hologram. And so what I've understood about studying these holograms, these crystal skulls, is often when we look into them, we will only see what we already know. And that I saw over and over again. It doesn't make it lesser, but when you go in with an intention into a crystal, that's what you see. And you've heard me say that before about computers. You can only get out of a computer what has been programmed into it. It doesn't move beyond the known. Only your heart moves beyond the known. Only your heart is awakened by mystery. So the crystal skulls are carrying something that has been known, but I don't believe it's been known by us in this present day. Now, to just finish my bit of story about Atlantis, it's very interesting that if we knew how to harness the sun in those days, that today we don't use the sun as one of our means of energy. Now, before you say, yes, we do, we have solar panels, I have to tell you, solar panels have nothing on how we could harness the sun. And I believe that what happens is that when we have maybe misused an energy, it literally becomes wiped out of our consciousness. We don't know how to do it. We're not doing it. And so it's almost like a blanket's put over something, or something's put in a safe. And it's a good word as a safe to say, we're going to keep that in safekeeping until you're ready to use it wisely. And I have experienced that so many times where something has been discovered. Maybe it's a crop formation. Maybe it's an artifact such as a crystal skull. Maybe it's a different artifact. And we only so-called discover it when humanity has reached a level of consciousness that is able to use that artifact, that object, that wonderful thing that has been left behind by our ancestors in an accountable way. And so we will see these crop formations, the skulls, coming into existence, and someone says, oh, I've just discovered it. Well, no, it was always there. It just wasn't seen by us, by our so-called physical eyes. If you imagine, it's almost as if it's held in the fourth dimension or the fifth dimension, and we can't see it until we raise our consciousness to be able to see into those dimensions. And this is what I really believe about these skulls. Now, as I say, in many cultures, they are seen to maybe be 13, and that when the 13 are brought together, then there will be a tremendous shift in consciousness. But when I was reading the Mind book yesterday, it was very much talking not about 13, but 52, because 52 is a very important number for the Maya. And here they said that there are 52 skulls, and that 24 of them have been found, but the others are still to be found. Now, I was reading a book about 2012, therefore we have passed that date, and it was saying that on 2012, the 52 skulls would be brought together, and again, new consciousness would be seen. Well, I don't think that happened, even though it was said that it might, it was predicted or prophesied. And it doesn't mean that their prophecy was wrong. It's just that things aren't always aligned to what we have as our calendar. I do believe there were probably 52 skulls. And these skulls are, being so ancient as they are, many unfortunately have been seen as ancient and then been discovered to be false or something that's been created in the modern world. So back in the 1990s, perhaps I start to tell my story, and then I'll tell you about a couple of the skulls that I did meet and about how we know which are false and which are not. So here I was, probably around 1996, and I decided, I was living in London, I was in a clinic in London, working in a clinic there, the Hale Clinic, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be good to go and teach in America? I'd done some teaching there, but I wanted to do more. So I just happened, and a lot of happenings happen to me in these times, I just happened to meet someone who said, oh, I'll promote you. And I said, great, you're an American? She said, no, I'm a Canadian. And I went, oh, but anyway, she does at least live across the Atlantic Ocean, across the pond. So she said, okay, I'll set up some teachings for you. And I went, wonderful. Can't wait to go to Vancouver because I've heard it's a wonderful place. And she said, actually, my teachings that I'm going to set up for you are in Toronto. A wonderful place, but wasn't where I thought I was going to go. Again, let go, Christine, let go. So here I was, setting up to be in Toronto for a month, to do these various teachings, and I was so excited. Traveled there, did some teachings, but when I went to Toronto proper to do some evening seminars, everything started to fall apart. I would go to the wrong, or I would be directed to go to the wrong place, or at the wrong time, or I would be directed to go and give this talk, and yet I didn't even understand the title of what I was supposed to be teaching. In other words, it was a little bit of a mess. Now, this was no disrespect to her. She'd set this up, but something very strange was happening. And I remember speaking on the phone to a friend and saying, I don't know why I'm here. Everything just seems to be falling apart. There's so much confusion. And as so often happens to me, I heard deep in my soul, this is not why you are here. And I think I was a little rude to my friend because I said, oh, bye-bye. And in those days, I put the phone down. We've now just clicked. But I said, bye-bye, I'm going. And I knew that the message I'd received was the truth. So I let go of all my ideas about why I was in Toronto. And it just so happened, I went to a bookstore the following day, wandering around, and a girl who I did not know came up to me and said, you need to know about the crystal skull. Never heard of it before. And I have to say, I'd met a lot of people with different ideas through my life. And I thought, just another trinket. And she then said, it's mine. And that's what caught my attention. Because another synchronicity. Just the month before going to Canada, I had made the decision that I would travel the Maya route, the route of the Maya. And that had come across because I'd met someone else. I won't go back to that story. But I'd signed up for this 2-week trip to travel where the Maya had been, particularly around Guatemala, Mexico, Belize. And when she said, this is Maya, I knew I was being given another piece of information. So I said, okay, where can I meet the crystal skull? And she said, I know Anna Mitchell-Hedges, who was the guardian of the Mitchell-Hedges skull. And she said, I'll take you there. I'll take you there tomorrow. So off we went, and I met Anna Mitchell-Hedges, a beautiful elderly lady who had been a 17-year-old when her father had found the skull. No, I should take that back. When her father, who was like an Indiana Jones person, had been in a place called Lubanton, which is in now modern Belize. And he had seen something sparkling down in one of the temples, and they had lowered Anna Mitchell-Hedges down into that temple because she was very small and young, and she had found the skull. And she brought it up, and with it came this detachable jaw, very unusual. So she had brought it up, and the Maya who were working with them at that time recognized what it was and knew it was a sacred artifact. Now, there are different stories, and I will say how those different stories played into my life. But they said, we would like someone to take it away because this was, at those days, was a British colony, and the British did have a bit of a tendency to take everything that didn't belong to them and put it in the British Museum. So Anna Mitchell-Hedges tells the story that she was asked, or her father was asked, to take it out of the country and keep it safe. Now, the Maya have a different story, which I'm going to share with you. So here I am looking at the Anna Mitchell-Hedges skull, having an experience with it, and it's just sitting on a coffee table. And I said, do you never worry that someone's going to steal it? And she said, no, because anytime anybody with ill intent has come towards it, it has sent off a vibe and they haven't been able to touch it or be near it. And she had been visited by many Native American, many different cultures, Inuit cultures, who had come, First Nation cultures, who had come to be with the skull. Now, I then said to her, wow, it was found in Belize. Well, I just happened to be going to Belize in a few weeks' time. And she said, would you take these pictures that we have of the skull when certain lights had been projected into the skull and it had given out certain wonderful colors? And she said, will you take these pictures to the people and show them the skull is with me and it is wonderful? Well, here's my ego trip. Don't know if you've ever been on one of those. I am the carrier of the pictures of the skull. Da 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 da. I don't know if any of you have ever been in that space where your ego rises up, minded. And so here it is. I was going to Belize, and so I made my journey a little earlier than I was meeting the group, and I went to this place where I could go catch a bus to Lebanton, the tiny village where this temple was. So I get on the bus and I'm there with chickens and hens and goats and people and having a wonderful bumpy journey towards this village, carrying these pictures. And I get there and I go to the site, and the people who were guarding the site, and I said, I've come with these pictures from Anna Mitchell-Hedges, and they said she stole the skull from us. And I went, oh, I am not the carrier of the pictures of the skull. I know nothing about it. And I said, and when's the next bus back to the town that I came from? And they said, 3 days' time. So here I was for 3 days in a village that people really didn't want me there. But in fact, what happened was that I made peace with the people there, and together we explored the beautiful temple, very unusual temple of Lebanton. And 3 days later, I went back to join my group, but much older, much wiser, less ego-driven. And when I returned to Britain, I wrote to Anna Mitchell-Hedges and let her know what was happening. And she did actually travel. She was well into her late 80s then. She traveled and took the skull to show them in Lebanton because she wanted them to know that the skull was safe. Now, I was just pleased to be part of that journey. I'm not sure about ownership of these skulls, please, I want to say that. But I want you to understand how we can be guided. Remember, I just wanted to go and teach in America, but in the end, I was guided to get involved with the skulls. And after that journey, I then became more interested in the skulls and had the privilege of meeting up with many different keepers of the skulls, such as Nick Noricino, who had Sharana, and he has now passed, but Nick was one of the people who did the most to promote the importance of these skulls, to protect them, to bring their knowledge through. I also met the skull called Max, and I've met other skulls. And there was a skull that was in the British Museum, I mean, is in the British Museum, there's one in the Smithsonian, but they have been tested. And what's different between the Mitchell-Hedges skull, Sharana, Max, on those skulls, there is no sign of how these skulls were made. There are no drill marks. There is no sign of any human involvement. But on the one in the Smithsonian, the one in the British Museum, there are signs of human involvement in making them. And since the skulls became more and more important or out there, popular, you've seen many, many people making them. And that's fine. It's a wonderful, I suppose, recognition of something sacred, but they do not carry that same energy. And that's why now I hope you understand why I had to ask permission to be able to work with these skulls and to do the meditation with you. So I've nearly given you all the information I want to give to you before we work together. Let me just say that the skulls themselves, you might be saying, well, how were they made? I've heard different stories. One story is that they were rubbed with sand and some sort of plant growth until they made smooth, and then they made them. When you look at the Mitchell-Hedges skull, you're saying, I don't think so. you could rub and rub for 20 generations and you'd still not be able to make the teeth sockets and everything else that you see here. The skulls are, if we do take them back to the time of Lemuria, Atlantis, they bring in the same mystery as we see in the magical walls. Walls, I am talking about walls. I call them Lemurian walls, where I've seen them in Peru, I've seen them in Japan, I've seen them in New Zealand, that the Lemurians had a way of linking together huge stones that they are literally, you can see almost no gap. And we can't understand how they did it with such precision. And there is a belief that there's a melting process where they meet, i.e. an intense heat was used to literally melt the crystal or some of the crystalline structure within the stones so that they could meet up. And there is a belief that maybe the stones were softer in those days, easier to work with. And I feel that heat was definitely something that was applied to these skulls to create them. And what I've heard is that in those days, certain priests or priestesses were able to bring enough fire up into their third eye and be able to actually project into a solid quartz crystal, particular design to create those skulls. And I feel I've heard this same story, that the ability to work with your third eye through the magic of intensifying the energy that flows up your spine, your kundalini, your dragon energy, to bring it to such a point in your third eye where you can visualize what you want to create and use the fire of the kundalini energy, dragon energy, to actually mask something out, to create something. This is not an easy feat, and I'm only saying is when we talk about the third eye just being, oh, it's the third eye. No, it is a powerful place. And we believe that many times wisdom keepers, ancient wisdom keepers, priests, priestesses have been able to use their intention and their fire to create different artifacts. I like that idea more than seeing generations rubbing sand against the crystal. So are you ready to do your meditation? And one little thing that I want to share with you, perhaps I'll do that after the meditation. So please, obviously, if you're driving or if you're not in a place where you can do this meditation, please do it later. Now, close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths, short breath in, long breath out, down through your body into the ground. And repeat. And again. Empty your mind of everything you want to get out of the skull. Because unfortunately, whatever you look into the skull with is what you will create. And we don't want to create from the known, we want to create from the unknown. So with that in mind, take your awareness into your heart chakra. Breathe in and out of your heart chakra. And through your heart chakra, see yourself in a beautiful cave. You're actually in the cave. And you're looking around this cave, and there's some natural light there for you to see. And it's almost as if all the walls of the cave are made of crystals. Sparkling. Different colors, different types of quartz, probably. Amethyst, rose quartz, green, orange, different colors. And you know this is a sacred place of crystals. You don't remember how you got here, but you know you're meant to be here. And as you look around, you see there is one area that is attracting you more than others. There's a magnetic pull on you. And as you will go over to this one area, you see there is a crystal skull. It's a crystal skull that particularly resonates with you. And you can take it out. You can take it away from where it has been held. And you can put it in front of you, perhaps on a rock. And each of these skulls do have different functions. They may be healing stones. They may be stones of the future. They may give you information about yourself. They may take you on an interdimensional travel. I want you to once again go back to your heart and say to the skull, whatever you feel I need at this time, I am open in love and honesty to whatever you want to share with me at this time. Now you can sit and face the skull, look at it through the eyes. You can hold it. You can look at it from the side, underneath, whatever you want to do. But just for a moment, be with this skull and let it bring its wisdom, healing, truth to you at this time. Now, knowing that you can return to the skull any time, I am asked that you put it back where you found it. Do not bring it with you. But bring with you the thoughts, the energy, the senses, the feelings you had being with this skull. Knowing this skull does not belong to you, but resonates with you. Knowing that to be true, through the power of love and light, gently bring yourself back through your heart chakra to the place where you are. And open your eyes. I want you to know you can return to the cave anytime. Usually I take someone into a cave, but I was shown that you can go there immediately as long as you stay within that crystal formation and leave the skull there. I wonder what you experienced. Please do share with me. However you're listening to this podcast, please, I'd love to hear from you. And one last thing I want to say. When I was working with the crystal skulls, one of the things that really amazed me was that when I looked into the eyes of the skulls, I knew I was looking at someone else who was looking back at me. I believe there are also entities, ETs, interdimensional beings who are watching us through these skulls, seeing us, learning from us, seeing where we're going. So it's a two-way mirror, it's a two-way journey. And if we do feel that these may have come from Lemurian Atlantean times, there is really a probable solution that they did come from extraterrestrial beings, that they were brought onto these planets. They didn't start their lives here. Maybe that's what you had as an experience when you were working with the skull. I didn't want to give you too much knowledge. So I want to leave you on that point. I will see you and hear from you, but perhaps before then, in the next podcast. But remember, follow your heart, follow your truth, and know that all is well. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Heart Speak podcast with Dr. Christine Page. Remember to check out other episodes in the podcast archive section on www.christinepage.com. And do share with friends, family, and colleagues. Join us next time for another edition of Heart Speak.